Hello everyone, welcome to Compliance for All live webinar on FDA's proposed rule regarding device establishment, registration, and listing, and how to register and list. My name is Ron, and I'm going to be your host for today's session. On behalf of the Compliance for All team, I'd like to thank you all for being part of this event. Today's webinar will be presented by David R. Dills. A few words about David before we could start off today's session. David R. Dills, Regulatory Affairs and Compliance Consultant, currently provides regulatory compliance and quality consultative services for medical device and pharmaceutical or combination manufacturers, and also has an accomplished record with more than 24 years of experience with Class 1, 2, and 3 medical devices, in vitro diagnostics, and pharmaceuticals in the area of regulatory affairs, compliance, and quality systems. He has been previously employed with increasing responsibilities by medical device manufacturers and consultancies, including a globally recognized CRO. We're honored to have David with us to present today's webinar. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, I'd like to inform you of the program outline for this training session. This webinar is for 60 minutes duration. First, David will take you through today's webinar, highlighting the areas that will be covered, and he will then share with you his presentation. And we would like to inform all our participants, once you're part of this teleconference, your phone lines will be placed on mute and would remain so until the Q&A window begins towards the end of the webinar. We also request all attendees to hold back your questions until the Q&A window begins. 10 minutes of your time will be allotted for the Q&A, during which your questions will be answered. And if for any reason you get logged out of this training session or teleconference, please follow the same procedure to join in again. And now that we're all ready to start, I request David to take it from here. David?
Thank you, Ron. I also would like to extend my welcome to our participants online today for our webinar entitled FDA's Proposed Rule, which is now final, and I'll explain why momentarily as we resume our presentation regarding device establishment, registration, and listing, and certainly how to register and list efficiently and effectively, and certainly compliant with FDA's requirements. We'll take you through the entire process, but with key emphasis on what are the significant changes from 2012 to the device registration and listing process. Our agenda, as set forth, will identify who's required to register and list, and certainly, more importantly, when and how. We'll review the new changes to FDA's device establishment registration and the listing regulations under the final rule, and also very quick emphasis to the Bioterrorism Act as related to the importation of devices, irrespective of device classification. Certainly, we'll provide clarification of who must provide establishments registration numbers, and certainly replacement of the current regulations regarding updating device listing information outside the required update periods. We'll make reference to the term, the FDA SIA, also known as the FDA Innovation Act, and why this is imposing new requirements if you are a device manufacturer or an importer online today. And we'll go through some of the key highlights and the key aspects of the FDA SIA and why that's important for our participants online today, as well as providing resources and guidance to help define a proven strategy for registering and listing. And then, as alluded to at the end of our presentation, we'll open up the lines to questions that you may have, as well as discussion, and we'll certainly follow up to your questions as well in the event that we don't have sufficient time to address any and all questions. But certainly, you will be in a position to contact Global Compliance Panel, Compliance for All, with any follow-up questions that you may have, and we'll certainly get back to you expeditiously with our responses. But before we begin our presentation, again, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be online today for our 1-hour webinar. I am making the assertion and assumption that most of our participants online, presumably, are device manufacturers, contract manufacturers, possibly contract sterilizers, and certainly importers. And we'll certainly go through this entire process as to why these changes are very profound high impact, and significant. From a historical perspective, on March 26, 2010, FDA did issue the 28-page proposed rule at that time that would amend its regulations regarding device establishment registration and listing. This is all public domain information. This was docket number FDA 2009 N0014. And the proposed rule at that time, back in 2010, did contain 4 types of proposed changes to FDA's registration listing process as set forth in 21 CFR 807. Today, we will identify and expound and describe in sufficient time what are the critical, key, significant changes related to this final rule. From a historical perspective, for those who are new to the establishment registration process, establishments involved in the production and distribution of any devices intended for use in the U.S. are required to register annually in accordance with 807.20. No surprise, and this is non-negotiable. That means most establishments are also required to list devices that are made at their facilities and the activities that are performed on those devices. Translation, this is known as establishment registration and listing. Those companies required to register and list are also required to pay the associated annual FDA user fee. Currently, effective October 1st, 2012, the requirements for device establishment registration and listing has indeed changed. On August 2nd, 2012, FDA issued the Medical Device Establishment Registration and Listing entitled Notice of Changes for Fiscal Year 2013 and a final rule to implement the requirements enacted in Section 321 of the Public Health Security and Bioterrorism Preparedness and Response Act of 2002, also known as the Bioterrorism Act, and Section 207 of the Medical Device User Fee and Modernization Act. The notice and final rule require all registered device establishments to pay the annual registration fee, regardless of the type or activities conducted. In addition, certain establishments must comply with additional registration and listing requirements. Hence, we are going to go over those requirements in our presentation today. The most notable change, however, contained in the final rule requires all contract manufacturers and contract sterilizers to register the devices they manufacture and sterilize with the agency. Previously, contract manufacturers and contract sterilizers were exempt from registration and listing in accordance with 807.20 subpart C 1-2. However, effective immediately, the final rule does indeed eliminate the exemption for contract manufacturers and contract sterilizers, thus requiring those who were previously exempt to register, list, and pay the user fee. This change significantly expands the scope of establishments subject to the annual establishment registration and listing requirements. As a result, FDA has estimates that the new rule will increase the number of establishments paying the user fee from 16,000 to 22,000 going forward. Other changes to the device registration listing requirements resulting directly from this new final rule include all registration and listing submissions must be made to the FDA through electronic means rather than paper form. 2, foreign establishments must identify all known importers in the name of each person who imports or offers to import a foreign establishment's device into the U.S. 3, all establishments, regardless, must pay a registration fee when they initially register with the FDA and for each annual registration thereafter. To make it official, the final rule, as stated and referenced in Federal Register Volume 77, number 149, was released on August 2nd, 2012. I also submit to you, if you do want to upload a copy, you can certainly go through to